In the name of God, most merciful, ever merciful, and may God's peace and blessings be upon His holy Prophet Muhammad and the purified members of his household and progeny. Brothers, sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So welcome to this next iteration or next phase in this course on Islamic doctrine, or the set of Islamic beliefs, or the system of Islamic beliefs, where we have already covered the belief in God, the attributes of God, including divine justice. And then we talked about prophethood, and we separated it between general prophethood, which are the topics that are usually addressed that are in common to all prophets, the general prophethood. And then we talked about specific prophethood or special prophethood. And there we concentrated only on the prophethood of our Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Given that this is an introductory lesson, we don't really have a lot of time to spend on every prophet, so we only concentrated on Prophet Muhammad. So at this point in the Islamic belief system, we could either continue on and finish off the afterlife and then come back to Imamah, which some scholars do, or we can finish off the topic of Imamah as an extension of prophethood and then go to the afterlife. So given that we're following the structure of the book that we've been following since the beginning of this course, the structure of the book goes into the topic of Imamah, so that's what we're doing as well. This lesson is basically structured in two halves. The first half has to do with a longish introduction, once again, to the topic. And then the author goes into a little bit of a description of the notion of Imamah. So we're introducing the notion of Imamah in this first lecture, in this first lesson. We're not actually going to provide any proofs, any arguments to argue for it. We just need to agree on what is it that we are going to be talking about. And the introduction is supposed to set the stage for that discussion. But before going in there, I thought we could spend a little bit of time just making a few preliminary remarks before we continue. We always do that for every series that we do, every topic that we address. The first remark simply has to do with the structure of these lectures on Imamah. I don't know if it was mentioned or it was mentioned quickly in the announcement for the course, that this is going to be a series of 5 lectures or 5 lessons. It may be more or less lectures, we'll see, but we're covering 5 lessons. So just so that you have a general idea of where we're going with these lessons, we have them here. So this first one, we are going to get a quick description of the notion, the concept of Imamah that we're going to be discussing. In the second one, so the next one, we are going to talk about the need for Imamah. As you remember, we did the same thing in prophethood. We had to establish, why is prophethood necessary? What is prophethood and is it necessary? So we're doing the same thing with the notion of Imamah. Is it necessary, and if so, why? So what's the argument for it? And then we go into the 2 of the big topics that we need to address, and they're related to the notion of Imamah as we're going to present it today. We'll go, once we establish that there is a need, there is a logical necessity, a rational necessity for Imamah, we are going to get into 2 topics related to that. The first one is the Imam appointed or not? And we're going to talk a little bit about that today. The second one has to do with some of the main characteristics of the Imam. And here we're going to concentrate on 2 of them specifically, because these are going to become the distinguishing features of an Imam. The first one is that they have access to special knowledge or divine knowledge. The second one is that they are infallible. Okay, so inshallah to come. And the last lecture is going to have to do with the last Imam, the 12th Imam, Imam al-Mahdi ajallahu faraja. So we'll talk very quickly about the necessity of having that Imam, the arguments that he does exist, that he was born, that he does exist, and why is it necessary that he reappears at the end of times. Okay, so that's the last lesson. The second point has to do with this topic in general, the topic of Imamah. I don't think I would be exaggerating if I said that this is the topic about which Islamic scholars have written the most in Islamic history, and this is the topic about which there is the most disagreement, and as a result of that disagreement, there is the most difference, and given those differences, we see the different schools of thought emerge. So it all stems from this point here. Everything else derives from this point about Imamah. What is an Imam? Is it necessary or not? How is an Imam chosen? Depending on whether it's necessary or not, what are the characteristics of the Imam? And what is our responsibility or duty with regards to the Imam based on what was said before, which is how are they chosen? Is it necessary or not? And so on and so forth. So obviously, if anyone understands the words that we're saying this is, without exaggeration, the most talked about topic in Islam, in Islamic scholarship, in Islamic theology, I don't think anyone would expect that we're really going to even scratch the surface in 5 lectures. Okay, so as we have done from the beginning until now, this is only an introductory course, a course to begin to understand the Islamic belief system. So I don't think that there should be any expectation that we're going to go into any sort of advanced, sophisticated arguments, counter-arguments, and polemics, and back and forth. That said, maybe at the end, do share any points that you'd like to discuss more, if you have specific concerns as we go along. And maybe at the end we can have one session when we can maybe quickly cover some of those questions or some of those concerns at the end very quickly. Okay, so that's the first of the more preliminary remarks. The second one has to do more with the methodology. So this is the way we're addressing the topics, the way we research them. As we've said again and again throughout, we're following a curriculum. This is an introductory course, this is a beginner course, so we are not trying to cover every angle and present every argument, nor am I here trying to present my own arguments when I'm talking about a topic. This is more following a certain curriculum and presenting it in the best possible way. I think for the purposes, our purposes here of presenting an introductory mini-course, mini-series on Imamah, what we're going to present should be very appropriate, should be very sufficient. That said, there are obviously going to be many different ways of presenting the arguments that we're going to be presenting. And if I see from the questions or the comments that there is a need, we can definitely expound on a lot of this. We can elaborate, we can present a lot of different points of view. There's a lot of subtopics under the big heading of Imamah that are not going to be covered here. So we're going to leave those aside, and as I said, if the need should arise, we're going to address them. Otherwise, inshallah, maybe we'll have the opportunity, the tawfiq one day to give either specific courses or specific series on some of these topics, or give a more detailed course on Imamah in general. So these would include all the different arguments for the Imamah, because that's certainly not what we're doing here. There are very major issues that need to be addressed, and we get into the kalam, like deep into the kalam, or the ilm al-kalam, the theology, discursive theology in Islam. For instance, with the whole theory of the trustworthiness of all the companions of the Holy Prophet or not, adalat al-sahaba. So this can be and should be discussed in much more depth. We're not even going to address the topic, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, in this mini-series, right? And there are many other kind of subtopics, such as, the trustworthiness of the companions, that we're leaving to another opportunity, inshallah. Maybe one last quick remark, and then we get into the lesson. This one has to do with the definition of Imam, or Imam. And this is more me. So before I go into the topic, I'm just adding my 2 cents. This is more me talking, it's not part of the lesson. And we'll get back into about this point a little bit later in the lesson. To a very large extent, I don't want to say that the entire problem arises there, but to a very large extent, the disagreement around the topic of Imamah between different scholars stems from a lack of consistency or lack of accuracy in their methodology. If I'm going to debate anything with you, if I want to discuss anything with you, we need to start by agreeing on what's the definition of what we're discussing. If we disagree on the definition, there's no starting point here. We need a common starting point. We need to both agree on what an imam is. And unfortunately, if you go back to the majority of what has been said, what is written about the topic of imamah, you'll see that they do not start with this point. They jump into the topic as though there's an assumption that people already know what an imam is or what imamah is. So a proper definition, an accurate term definition is not provided. And if this is missing, then there cannot be an agreement on what the role of that imam is going to be, and then everything that ensues. And inshallah we're going to go back into that. And I don't want to say that the author falls into the same issue, same mistake even potentially, but there is a little bit of that. The definition that is given is going to contain to a very large extent the topic of imamah to a more political or administrative role. So if the definition that we're agreeing on for imamah is the one that we are going to see in this lesson, then a lot of what ensues is going to, follow a certain path. If it's something different, then it's going to follow a different path. And if we don't even agree on the notion of imam to start with, what is it, then there's really no place, no platform, no forum to have a discussion. Okay, so I'm going to park that for now. I'm going to leave that as is for now. But it might be something that we need to get back into later as the series progresses. Okay, but this is a very key, important point that is very rarely addressed. We need to agree on a definition first, and then we'll get into the topic, get into the arguments and sub-arguments. So as we said, the lesson starts with an introduction. So we are told that when we study history, we see that the Holy Prophet played a certain role as Islam was beginning to spread in Mecca, the city of Mecca. But generally speaking, that role seems to change considerably when the Holy Prophet goes to the city of Medina. So when we look at the role of the Holy Prophet, if you follow like a very superficial reading of history, it seems that his role was a lot more only religious in Mecca. When he goes to Medina, he takes on a completely additional, I don't want to say different role, he adds to his functions. So in addition to his religious role, in addition to explaining religion, communicating the message of God to humanity, one of the first things that he does when he reaches the holy city of Medina is to have a mosque built, and that mosque becomes the central location for Islamic life, the life of Muslims. And this is the life of Muslims in every dimension, from every aspect. So you're going to have a financial and economic aspect, you're going to have a political aspect. After a little while, the wars started, there's battles that started, so there's a military aspect to it, and so on and so forth. All the conflicts between people, some of them were minor conflicts within a family, and some of them were a lot bigger conflicts that could very quickly escalate into a war between different clans or different tribes. All of this, people were coming back to the Holy Prophet and using him as the ruler politically, as the one who is going to have the final say financially, as the person who is going to be playing the judicial role, so the law in the sense of a tribunal, fair and objective between people, and so on and so forth. So generally speaking, when people look at the history of the Holy Prophet, they see that it looks like there was a shift. The life in Mecca looked like it was a lot more contained as a role for the Holy Prophet, a lot more contained to religion, to a theological role, whereas when he goes to Medina, this role is much more expanded. Okay? So he adds to it all these different dimensions and these different layers to his role of a prophet. So generally speaking, when people want to talk about these additional aspects of Islam, so Islam as a system for finance or economy, Islam as a political system, Islam with a military theory, and so on and so forth, they usually tend to concentrate on the period of time when the Holy Prophet was in the city of Medina, not the first part of his mission, which was in the city of Mecca. The truth of the matter, though, is that this is kind of an oversimplification of the facts. It's not that the Holy Prophet was not playing that role in the city of Mecca. It's that, given the context, he did not really have a lot of room to emphasize those additional aspects of his prophetic mission. The majority of the work that he was doing was trying to establish the foundation, the belief foundation for this new religion, bring people into it, but of course he was still playing those other roles. Except that the context in which the Muslims were living, so you have all these transgressions against them, all this injustice, oppression against them, and for about 3.5 years they were living almost in kind of a hiding situation between in the valley of Shu'ab Abi Talib. In the first 3 years, maybe even up to 5 years according to historians, the prophetic mission was considered secret. Okay, the Holy Prophet had not yet been ordered from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make his mission public. So he was not calling people at large. His mission started with the closest people to him, and then to the family members around him, to Bani Hashim, and then it started expanding to the rest of Quraysh, and then it became a public mission. So when you look at all of these factors together, it's not that the Holy Prophet's mission was contained only, restricted only to the religious dimension. The other dimensions were there all along, but the conditions did not really allow the Prophet to spend too much time on them. And even if he did, there's no mature Islamic nation or Islamic group of scholars, companions, who had spent enough time to understand all these nuances and to spend enough time understanding what the Holy Prophet is doing. When this move happens to the city of Medina and the Holy Prophet goes to the city of Medina, the context is completely different. He's very well received. So the Muhajirin, those who travel with the Holy Prophet from Mecca with him, these are the first Muslims, those who entered Islam at first. They come with the Holy Prophet to the city of Medina, where they are greeted by the Ansar, those who are going to support the Holy Prophet, and they are greeted as in the most generous and the most honorable manner, with huge respect, with huge help from the Ansar. This is a peaceful environment for the Holy Prophet to start building the foundations of Islam. And this is where right from day one you start seeing the Holy Prophet, if he is given the opportunity, so in this case he was given the opportunity, he starts to spend a lot more time explaining the other foundations of Islam, which include the political dimension, which include the financial dimension, which include the military dimension. Okay? So the reason we're spending time on this, inshallah, is going to become clear in a second. Now, we need to make sure that this is well understood. The link between this and what we said previously, inshallah, is also clear, but just to make sure that it is clear, when we presented specific or special prophethood, and we talked about the prophethood of the Holy Prophet specifically, we said that Islam is a universal religion, and Islam is the eternal religion. And as part of that, we needed to clearly say that Islam, to be able to claim that, needs to fulfill or be able to answer the needs of humanity in every dimension. You cannot be a comprehensive religion, a comprehensive system of life, and leave gaps, be silent on major aspects of life, such as a political system, or such as a financial system, or such as a judicial system. You have to have something in place. You have to present some sort of theory, some sort of proposal to manage the affairs of the people as they live their lives. So the link we're making here is to say that the Holy Prophet, from the beginning of his mission, he was presenting a full theory. But the context, receiving that mission, did not allow him to really spend more time than that and give more details about the other dimensions. So to prioritize, he prioritized theology and beliefs, which is the core of Islam. And the rest came along as the events unfolded and the opportunities presented themselves. Okay? So now, inshallah, we're going to go very quickly over two sets of Quranic verses. And there's a lot of them. I'm presenting samples. And the first group of verses, inshallah, it will be clear enough, are the ones that clearly explained to the people following the Prophet in his time, as well as anyone who would come later, believing in the Holy Prophet, believing in the Quran, that the Holy Prophet must be obeyed in everything, must be followed in everything. Whether the instruction, whether the teaching of the Prophet has to do with something related specifically and explicitly to religion, if the Prophet tells you this is what you must believe in regarding God and this is how you must worship, clearly a religious issue, or anything else. So if the Prophet, two people come to the Prophet and there's a conflict between them and he rules in favor of one over another. Okay, well, this is not a purely religious matter, or is it? So this is what we're trying to say here. Depending on your understanding of religion, you're going to view religion as something more comprehensive, with something potentially to say about everything happening in life, especially the big dimensions of life, or not. So our claim was that Islam is a universal and eternal religion. Therefore, the Holy Prophet needs to be obeyed in every dimension of life. So now let's see what the Quran says about this in general. So there are verses in the Quran that talk about obedience to the Holy Prophet in general, in everything, and then specifically about certain dimensions. Okay, so when we have both, it gives a good idea, a good insight about the role of the Holy Prophet, which is going to be crucial for understanding the role of an Imam. So some of the general verses, and by my counting very quickly, there's about 25 of these verses in the Quran. We have a sample here. So there's many verses that are kind of in line with sometimes different wording, sometimes different details, say obey Allah and the Messenger, but if they turn away, indeed Allah does not like the faithless. So this is a clear divine instruction. You must obey God and you must obey the Holy Prophet. There's no exception, there's no detail. It's not saying only when it has to do with religion, it's in general. If the Prophet gives an instruction, an order, a command, a teaching, it must be obeyed. And if not, if anyone rejects, refuses, then they fall in the other category mentioned in the verse. You become a kafir, you become faithless. And here we have the sample of other verses. And whoever obeys Allah and His Messenger, He shall admit him to gardens with streams running in them, to remain in them forever. That is a great success. But whoever disobeys Allah, so this is the opposite. So you have the verses commanding, and here the if you do not. So what happens? Whoever disobeys Allah and His Messenger and transgresses the bounds set by Allah, He shall make him enter a fire to remain in it forever, and there will be a humiliating punishment for him. Whoever obeys Allah and the Messenger, they are those whom Allah has blessed. Okay, if you want to be in that category, including the prophets and the truthful, the martyrs and the righteous, and excellent companions are they. Whoever obeys the Messenger certainly obeys Allah. And as for those who turn their backs, we have not sent you to keep watch over them. Okay, and then we have many other verses. You who have faith, obey Allah and His Messenger, and do not turn away from Him while you hear Him. There's a lot to say about each of these verses, we don't have time. And obey Allah and His Messenger, and do not dispute, or you will lose heart and your power will be gone. And be patient, indeed Allah is with the patient. But the faithful, men and women, are guardians of one another. They bid what is right and forbid what is wrong, and maintain the prayer, give the zakah, and obey Allah and His Messenger. It is they to whom Allah will soon grant His mercy. Indeed, Allah is Almighty, All-Wise. The day when their faces, so those who have rejected the obedience to the Holy Prophet, the day when their faces are turned about in the fire, they will say, we wish we had obeyed Allah and obeyed the Messenger. And Allah's verse here, on that day, on that day, those who were faithless and who disobeyed the Messenger will wish the earth were leveled with them, and they will not conceal any matter from Allah. Okay, so I think this is enough of a sample. And as we said, there's at least double of these verses and other ones that should make it very clear that obedience to the Holy Prophet is obligatory in religion in all matters. Okay, so this is a general rule. So now this was to establish the general rule. Now the specific rule, some specifics. The only response of the faithful, so if you are a believer, the only response you could ever have when they are summoned to Allah and His Messenger, that He may judge between them, is to say, we hear and we obey. It is they who are the felicitous, or those who are victorious. So here we have hukm, which the majority of the commentators say we're talking about ruling. This is the role of the judge that is being played by the Holy Prophet, the role of the legislator in a state, in a nation. O you who have faith, obey Allah and obey the Messenger and those vested with authority among you. And inshallah we're going to come back to this verse. It's an extremely important verse. And if you dispute concerning anything, refer it to Allah and the Messenger. It's not if you dispute only in Allah and His attributes and how to worship. If you dispute in anything, refer it to Allah and the Messenger. If you have faith in Allah and the last day, that is better and more favorable in outcome. But know, by your Lord, they will not believe. They will not believe until they make you a judge in their disputes. Then do not find within their hearts any dissent to your verdict, and submit in full submission. So this, we have a higher level of faith required here. Is that those who are believers, they have to come to the Holy Prophet to get the ruling. And if the ruling happens to be something with which they disagree, because the Holy Prophet might rule against them, they cannot find in their hearts any hatred or any dislike or any dissent towards the ruling of the Holy Prophet, because they have fully submitted to the Holy Prophet and his ruling. And then the Quran continues, indeed we have sent down to you the book with the truth, so that you may judge between the people by what Allah has shown you. Do not be an advocate for the traitors. Again, here is hukm. Here's the ruling aspect of the role of the Holy Prophet. We have sent down to you the book with the truth, confirming what was before it of the book, and as a guardian over it. So judge between them by what Allah has sent down. Okay, so again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving this role, this function to the Holy Prophet. Now, He's talking about judging. We continue in the verses. The Prophet has greater, and these verses are very clear, inshallah, very, very clear. The Quran says the Prophet has greater claim over the believers than they have over themselves. So I don't know what more is required from the Quran to say when the Quran says the Holy Prophet has more right over you than you have over yourself. In other words, if he judges, if he rules, if he gives a command, if he gives a ruling, then that applies. End of story. There is no restriction on which dimension of life, whether it's theological or not, it's financial, political, military. He has more right over you than you have yourself over yourself. Okay? A faithful man or woman may not, when Allah and His Messenger have decided on a matter, have an option in their matter, and whoever disobeys Allah and His Messenger has certainly strayed into manifest error. So these are much more clear verses of the Quran. Have you not regarded those who were forbidden from secret talks? So here, I explicitly mentioned this verse because it may look like it's something very minor. The Quran is actually addressing an ethical issue that was happening at that time in the Muslim community, where people are telling each other things in secret. And the Quran, this is Surah Al-Hujurat. Surah Al-Hujurat is very concerned with things related to ethics and morals, etiquette, as we would call it, all related to akhlaq. And so at some point it talks about this and how there are people who would talk in secret and talk in secret in front of others. Alaykum as-salam wa rahmatullah. In other words, the Quran is considering this to be a disrespectful act. If you have something in secret to say, don't tell each other secrets in front of others, because you make the other person feel excluded. But in addition, the Quran is referring to things here as though maybe there are hypocrites talking to each other, and maybe they're talking against the Holy Prophet or conspiring against Islam. So while it's addressing a kind of an ethical, moral issue, there might be a lot more going on at a deeper level. So they were given explicit orders to no longer engage in this kind of secrecy. You have something to tell someone one-on-one, go aside and talk to them, but don't make it look like there's a secret going on, which may even give a impression to others that you're talking about them or conspiring against them. Okay? So it's very, very meticulous. This may look like it's a very small detail, but even for something that small, the Quran, its language I find is still very clear and very strong in terms of having to obey the Holy Prophet, even in something that may look very minor. It says, have you not regarded those who were forbidden from secret talks, but again resumed what they had been forbidden from, and hold secret talks imbued with sin and transgression and disobedience to the Messenger? And when they come to you, they greet you with that which Allah never greeted you. They did not used to say salam or salamun alaykum, which is the greeting that they had been instructed. And I don't want to go into that. There's a whole a commentary dimension to this that inshallah another day we'll talk about. And they say to themselves, why does not Allah punish us for what we say? Let hell suffice them, they shall enter it, and it is an evil destination. So I don't know what more of a strong language the Quran could use in this. O you who have faith, when you talk secretly, so this is the next verse, do not hold secret talks imbued with sin and aggression and disobedience to the Messenger, but talk secretly in a spirit of piety and God-fearing, and be wary of Allah, toward whom you will be mustered. The spoils that Allah, and here this is more of a financial topic, or more of a topic maybe that could at that time maybe seen by the Arabs of that time to be considered related to military affairs. Okay, so either or, the spoils that Allah gave to His Messenger from the people of the townships are for Allah and the Messenger, the relatives and the orphans, the needy and the traveler, so that they do not circulate among the rich among you. And there's a whole Islamic history behind this. Okay, so that you do not always create a system where the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. Take whatever the Messenger gives you and relinquish whatever he forbids you. So it's not your place to come and argue about these things. And be wary of Allah, indeed Allah is severe in retribution. So, a lot of verses, and I apologize, but inshallah this is to establish, especially if you want to use that as a reference afterwards, this was to establish that if you follow the Quranic theory about the role of the Holy Prophet, very clearly the verses, if you want to go to the general verses that talk about this, they say that the Holy Prophet needs to be obeyed specifically in everything. And if you go to the big dimensions of life, which today have become sciences, so let's say finance and economics, let's say political theory, let's say military theory, let's say the judicial system or the legal system, then you have specific verses in the Quran also re-establishing the authority of the Holy Prophet in those fields one by one, in case there is any doubt about where the role of the Holy Prophet starts and stops. Okay, so clearly the Quran does both so as not to leave any doubt. Okay? So if we look at the history in Islam, we see that the Holy Prophet played that role in Mecca to a lesser degree, at least when we read history, because it was maybe less captured and less of a possibility for him to show, and much more clearly in Medina. And the verses of the Quran support this. As we said, the general ones and the specific ones. So the question is, so what happens when the Holy Prophet passes away? What do we say about what Islam says we are supposed to do when the Holy Prophet passes away? Why did the Quranic theory Why did Islam, when it presented this man, this prophet, to the Muslims, to those who accept to follow him, if we agree that it said you must follow him not only in religious matters, but in all matters, including the religious ones, what do we do at the moment when he passes away and leaves this world? Does it mean that people are automatically ready to assume those responsibilities themselves or not? And this is going to become the biggest point of contention or disagreement in the Islamic Ummah from the moment of the passing away of the Holy Prophet and afterwards. And it's not that it was not in the time of the Holy Prophet. It's just that it was only understood by minorities. And very few people understood the significance of this because they were not living it yet, so long as the Holy Prophet was among them. But when the Holy Prophet passes away, this becomes the main issue at a scholarly level in the Islamic world. What happens now? Who is supposed to play the functions that the Holy Prophet was playing? That's one question. And the second question, who decides who's going to play that role? In other words, where does that legitimacy come from? So these are two separate things. One of them is who plays that role, or do we break the role into parts? So there's a religious component, and there's a worldly component, let's call it. We could break it into two or more, and say, well, this one is played by so-and-so, and that one is played by another. Or we say, no, that whole role needs to continue to be played by someone. That's the main question. And here, as we said, we find the main point of difference between the two schools of thought. The Sunni school and the Shi'i school. The Shi'i school says this role does not stop with the passing away of the Holy Prophet. And the arguments are to come. They're not going to be presented today. We're just presenting the topic today. The Sunni school says people get to choose who plays that role because the religious component is done. As the Quran itself says, the religion has been completed and perfected. The Holy Prophet is done presenting religion. What's left can be absorbed, can be administered, can be managed by the commoners, by normal people. If you accept this understanding of the role, that role of the Holy Prophet, then there's no problem saying that people get to choose whomever they wish, which leads to an entire theory around political rulership in Islam and all the other systems and how they are to be determined. But if you say all of this is one and the same system, you cannot break it up, the religious from the non-religious, the religious and the worldly, then that's going to bring you in a different place. Okay? So this is kind of the main argument. One of the reasons that we see huge differences in the political theory, if you go, let's say, if you want to take an extreme, they say, for instance, whoever happens to be in a position of political power needs to be obeyed. This is so as to avoid disunity and chaos in the Islamic world, which is kind of a very important principle in Islam in general. But if you stop short and you just say, whoever happens to be in power needs to be respected, you're kind of leaving out a detail, which is, does it matter how they got into power or not? And does it matter how they rule or not? Do they need to be a just ruler or not? Do they need to be an Islamic ruler or not? Do they need to have been chosen by the majority or not? What if they oppressed and they were tyrannical and unjust until they were able to reach the throne? Is that considered okay? And can I still say that this is a Islamic ruler accepted by Islamic political theory or not? And so, of course, in that school, you are going to find many scholars who say, regardless of how that political ruler made it to the throne, made it to the seat of the political power, they need to be obeyed. They must be respected and considered a legitimate ruler. And if you go to the time of Bani Umayyah and Bani Abbas and so on and so forth, there's a lot that was written in support of this. But if you, from the starting point, you say, no, this role is one and the same. The religious role cannot be broken away from the worldly role, which is the dimensions that we mentioned. The political rule, the administration, the legal aspect or the judicial aspect, the economic and financial, the military, all of that is part and parcel of the same system, which is Islam. So whoever is playing that role, those worldly roles, must also be playing the Islamic role. And whether it's one or the other, inshallah, we're going to get into the details, as we said, in the next time, to provide the arguments for it. To say, why do we say it has to be one over the other? If you go to the Shi'i school, the Shi'i school says that the true version of Islam is the one that we saw applied to the extent possible at the time of the Holy Prophet. And everything that has happened since then, because of this breakup of the roles, because you've opened the door to anyone coming and taking the seat and becoming a ruler and saying that they have legitimacy in their rule, this has opened the door to all the distortions that have ensued in Islam. And why you have to constantly go back and reform, and constantly go back and fix, and constantly go back and say, this is not the legitimate, not the authentic, not the genuine version of Islam. The last point here that I didn't want to talk about too much, and inshallah I'll talk about it next time in a little bit more detail, is an objection that may be given to this. And there's a lot of objections. But the main one is, this topic should not be addressed, because if we look at history, this has been the main topic of discord and disunity and problems between Muslims. And the only beneficiary of this kind of topic is whoever wants to attack Islam. They benefit from seeing the Muslims disunited, disorganized, and in conflict with each other. And history has proven that that is actually the case. And the short answer to this, and inshallah we're going to get into a lot more detail next time, the short answer to this is not, if we adopt an approach that this is no different than any other scientific inquiry. This is an objective topic of research that needs to be addressed objectively. And Islam is not something that you impose, or faith in general is not something that you impose on anyone. This is the no compulsion in religion. Then it should not lead to the types of scenarios that are being described in this type of objection. If people were actually objective, and I come to the argument with my logic and my reason and my calm, scientific, logical, rational mind, and you come to it with yours, it should not lead to the type of discord and disunity that is addressed or that is referred to in the objection. Okay, we're going to leave it at that for now, and just so that we wrap it up for today. So in general, what is this notion of imamah that we want to present and that we want to talk about? When we say imam, linguistically, generally speaking, it simply means someone who is in a position of leadership over a group. And that's why we say imam, referring to imam of a mosque. So the person who leads in the mosque. Or the imam of a prayer, imam of jama'ah, the person leading the prayer. The Quran, in fact, uses this type of imam too. In Surah At-Tawbah, it says a'immat al-kufr, the imams of kufr, so that no one just says that imam only means something good, for instance. Okay, the imams of disbelief or the imams of faithlessness. In Islamic theology, however, and clearly there are reasons for that scriptural, so in the Quran and in the narrations as well, the term imam was associated with something different. And this is what I mentioned at the beginning of the lesson. What is it associated with? So, based on what we presented, what it's associated with is the role attributed to the person leading the nation, the Islamic nation. That is your Imam. So if you concentrate on the worldly aspect, you fall in one path. You say the person leading the Ummah, the person leading the Islamic nation is playing the worldly aspect only, you fall in one path. And if you say they are leading the Islamic nation in everything, so not only in worldly affairs, in religious affairs as well, in divine affairs as well, you are going to fall into another path. Okay? So, what do the Shia say? Just so that we summarize it. The Shia say that there is no legitimacy to the person holding that position unless that legitimacy is given from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the arguments that we will present are going to be the basis on which the Shia say this. But this is their claim. This is the claim of the Shia. That if someone assumes that role on their own, by themselves, there is no legitimacy that they are going to be an Imam. What gives them the right to speak on behalf of God in all of these things? That's the question. Who gave them that legitimacy? Did the Holy Prophet leave this world after having played that full role, having explained what happens or not? Did he give the impression that people can manage their own affairs by themselves once he leaves this world or not? That's the main question, right? So if you believe like the Shia do, like the claim of the Shia is, that the only legitimate power, validity for this role is going to come from God, then this means, and this is the path, this means that first of all, this person can only be appointed by God. Because in other words, this role is not going to be that different from the role of a prophet. If the person is going to continue to play the role of the prophet, the full role of the prophet, then they need to be appointed by God like the prophet was appointed by God. 1. 2. If they are going to continue to play the role of the prophet, then they need to be infallible like the prophet. Otherwise, we fall into the same problems and the same arguments against someone claiming to be a prophet, but who makes mistakes, who may forget, intentional, accidental or not, so on and so forth, which we covered in the general prophethood. And the last important point is they have to have access to divine knowledge to apply religion on the ground, on day to day, and the events of the day. If you don't agree that this is the full role that needs to be played by whoever takes on the role of the Imam, then you're probably not agreeing on the definition of what an Imam is. And we need to go back to the source of that at the time of the Holy Prophet, or what the Quran says, to see which one of the two versions of an Imam is it. Is the Imam the person only playing the role of worldly affairs, or is the Imam playing the religious role, including the worldly affairs, like the Holy Prophet was doing? So, the last conclusion from this, just to continue the same argument, the same logic, is that if I said this person is going to play the same role as the Holy Prophet, they need to be appointed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they need to have infallibility, and they need to have access to divine knowledge. If they are this person, then they hold the same authority as the Holy Prophet did. I do not go to any scholar or to any person, however good they are, however religious they are, and consider them an authority in my religion. I I need that to be the authority, the source of my faith and the source of my link to God. I need to be infallible. So it needs to come from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or as we established, the Holy Prophet. A Prophet, in our case, the Holy Prophet. The same argument is going to apply to the Imam. This person, if they are appointed by Allah, and if they are infallible, and if they are divinely inspired, so they are infallible in themselves and their knowledge is infallible, then when they give a teaching, when they do something, when they say something, all of that becomes a religious obligation. Which is a completely different understanding of now the role of an imam versus the role of someone who simply occupies a political position, or who simply administers the financial affairs or the military affairs or the legal affairs of a nation. Because this is more someone who's kind of employed however they got to that seat. It could be someone who's elected, someone who's appointed, they get there by the sword and by tyranny, doesn't matter. So we need to agree first on what is the full function, what is the full role of this imam, which is the definition that we talked about at the beginning. And is it an extension of the role of the Prophet or not? Are they continuing the work of the Prophet or not? Which opens the door to some objections. Did the Prophet not finish his mission? Did he not complete his mission or not? Why do we need someone to come and continue the role of the Prophet if he was done? If he was done. Okay? So inshallah, the next lesson, what we'll talk about is what is the necessity? What makes us say that this role is necessary to remain in the Islamic nation, this role of Imam? And why do we say that that is necessary? On what basis? What's our argument to say that this role is necessary? وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين.